Hi, Mick McQuaid here to talk to you about terminal interfaces. This is the third of, I think, are there 4 lectures this week? Whatever. In any event, this one is optional. You don't need to watch this. This is only for people who are curious about computers. If you think of computers as a necessary evil, just skip this video. It won't hurt your grade. But some people want to know more about the things that they can do with their computers. And this video shows how I set up my terminal to work more efficiently. And there's a lot of upfront work with this, so you have to actually like working with the terminal to do this, which is why it's optional. But first, I want to show you how I would operate if I'm not curious. There are some inefficiencies and ugliness built into the default way of working. And these are things that I want to remedy because I use the computer all day, every day, and I mainly use the terminal. Now I'm using a Mac, and the workflow will differ a bit for Windows and a bit for Linux. The default way is this. First I open up the Finder on Mac, and I choose Applications over here on the left side of the screen. And then I scroll down. I have a lot of applications. I scroll down to Utilities, which is near the bottom, and choose it. Then I choose terminal.app in the Utilities folder. And when I click on this, I get a screen that looks like this. Now, some of the ugliness here is unavoidable. This computer is owned by the university, so they get to print this message here. And they get to say what my username is. This is my username, and this is the name of this computer, and they get to determine that. So that's all pretty uninformative to me, but the university has its rules. Now, if I switch to the folder where I make my lectures for this class, I see this. So I say cd courses /db/lecture, and I get again my name, the name of the computer, and the name of the directory I'm in. However, I have a number of courses and they all have a lecture directory, so this doesn't really tell by itself, it doesn't really tell me anything that I want to know, because I want to know which lecture directory I'm in. And I need to look here to do it, and eventually if I press enter a bunch of times, this is going to scroll off the screen, and I'm not going to know which lecture directory I'm in just by looking at this thing. Also, this takes up quite a bit of room on the screen. If I keep doing this, it takes up over 1/3 of the screen. And now I can type in SQLite 3 and get to work on my homework for this class. So that's the default way. Now my current approach is I click Control Space and then K to get this. And this is a menu. This is a command launcher that I use called Quicksilver. And you can use Spotlight if you're on Mac for this. However, Spotlight builds an index that takes up a lot of room on the disk, and I'm perpetually running out of disk space. So I've disabled Spotlight, and I use this much smaller tool in place of Spotlight. And so I choose Kitty on that menu. I didn't mention that. So I select K for Kitty, and Kitty is the first thing that comes up. A bunch of other stuff comes up too, but the first thing that comes up is Kitty. And I select Kitty, and I get a window that looks something like this. This is after I've done some activities in it. Let's see. Well, you can see that it's Kitty across the top here. And then I have a bunch of windows in Kitty. I have a window for my administrative work, a window for my UX prototyping class, a window for prompt engineering class, a window for this class, which is what all this is. This is all the open window, and then a miscellaneous one for other tasks. And I can continue this all the way across. I can have lots of windows open, and in each window I can have several window panes. So here I have 3 window panes open. 2 of them are on text editors. These 2 are on text editors, and this one is just in the lecture directory for this class. So this text editor has a somewhat transparent background. You can sort of see canvas behind it. I like having a transparent background for a couple of reasons. One is it gives me context, and the other one is that I sometimes want to copy things from the back window. And this text editor is called NeoVim, and it has a status line down here that gives me some information about the file that I'm on, and a menu of files which I can either click on or use keystrokes to go to these different files. Currently I'm on the syllabus for this class. Over here is another NeoVim window pane, and this one is not transparent because I can toggle transparency in case the font, in case there's not enough contrast. I usually will turn off transparency, and you can see here that I've just toggled the transparency. I did this with a keystroke actually, that causes this command to appear. And then down here I've said ls. Now this is the prompt that I get on Kitty instead of my name and the name of the machine that I'm on. I get the last three directories, the directory I'm in, the directory above that, and the directory above that as my prompt. And down here you can see that I get the top level directory and then an ellipsis, and then the lecture directory and the directory beneath that I'm in. And then I say ls to look at what's in that directory. Now, I don't always use this, but I'm just illustrating. This prompt comes from Powerline Go, which I'll mention a little later. And the shell that I'm actually interacting with inside the terminal is called bash, which I'll also mention. So here I'm zooming in on one of the Kitty windows. I zoomed in on the upper right-hand corner window, and so it takes up the whole screen. So often the one that I'm working on, I want to take up the whole screen because sometimes the lines are really long, and I don't necessarily want them to wrap. So the way that I work is I have in each window I have usually a text editor in the largest pane, which you saw, that was NeoVim, and then I have other commands in one of the small panes. And I like having two small panes so I can use one as reference and the other one that I'm actually working in. And I like having a default set of windows, one for each class I teach, plus an admin window and a MISC window. Mac OS gets updated fairly frequently, and I have to restart the computer when that happens, and so I like to have the same window arrangement when I restart the computer. The programs I'm using are Kitty, a terminal emulator. There are plenty. There's a more popular one on Mac called iTerm, which I will mention in a minute. And then on Windows, there's a command.exe or PowerShell are the most common ones. Then I use a shell called bash. On Windows, there's a built-in shell, or you can actually acquire bash on Windows. And I use blesh, a command completion tool for bash. I'll say more about that in a minute. The text editor NeoVim, I'll say more about that. And on Windows, the most popular ones are Notepad++ or VS Code. VS Code, though, sends telemetry to Microsoft, so I suggest you use, if you like VS Code, I suggest you use the one that doesn't send information. You know, the privacy-preserving one is VS Codium. And then Powerline Go, as I mentioned, is a modifier for prompts and status lines. And then all my packages, all my software packages are loaded with Brew, pretty much, except for Python ones, which are loaded with UV. Windows has a package manager called Chocolatey. There are many package managers. These are just the most popular ones. So Kitty, as I said, is a terminal emulator. So it used to be the case that there was one mainframe computer for everyone in the office, and people connected to the computer with a machine called a terminal, which had a screen and a keyboard and a very rudimentary computer for connecting to the mainframe computer. So most computers have or can acquire a program that emulates these old terminals because the workflow in them was so efficient. And they usually have a lot more features than the old terminals, but some of the same limitations. So most people, when they first see a terminal, see the limitations. They don't see the features. So the features include Kitty. Now this is controversial to say. Some people say Kitty does take up a lot of memory. I used to use iTerm2, another terminal emulator, in a combination with tmux, and that took up a lot of memory, a lot more memory than Kitty. But I've since come to think that maybe it was tmux that was taking up the memory, not iTerm2. I'm not sure about that. In any event, Kitty works on Mac or Linux, and I recently decided to acquire a Linux computer, so I wanted a terminal that would work on both, so I switched from iTerm2, which is the most popular terminal on Mac, to Kitty, just because it works on both Mac or Linux. It may very well be the case that it does take up too much memory. I'm not sure about that. It takes up less than my previous setup. And it supports a lot of features that I like. So I like to have tabs, I like to have tiles, I like to have scripts, remote control, good font management, cursor management, images, so you can display images in the terminal without going to another program, which I like. And I configure it using two files, and I can make these two files available to you if you want to get a start in Kitty. That's totally up to you, just ask. Then within Kitty, I use a shell, and the default shell is called ZSH in Mac, but you can choose a shell from among many possibilities. There's ZSH, there's Bash, the one that I use, and Fish. Those are the three most popular ones. And on Windows, I think there's a built-in shell that you can't get rid of, but you can also download Bash or other shells to run on top of it. Or you can obtain WSL2, which stands for Windows Subsystem for Linux 2, which can run any shell of your choice. So I've been using Bash for many years, 26 years now. This is old. So when Mac switched to ZSH as its default, Mac used to have Bash as the default. When it switched to ZSH, I just stayed with Bash out of habit. So what it provides is a string of characters called a prompt, and that string and my response are interpreted by Bash. And then I control Bash using two main files, Bash Profile and Bash RC, and I can make those files available to you if you want to get started with Bash. And Bash also keeps a list of key value pairs called the environment and consults this list every time I type in a command before interpreting that command. So a lot of the stuff I do with Bash is managing that set of key value pairs. And one of those is a file that I won't share with you that contains my API keys. So I pay for many of these keys, so they're private to me. And I load this file into my environment, and then I can call programs like Claude Code from Bash and expect that they have access to the appropriate API key without me having to type it in each time. Bash has aliases, so for example, I use NV as an alias for NeoVim, and it has functions to simplify common commands. So for example, I use the command MC to create a directory and change to that directory. So it actually expands to this command, which is making a directory. -P means make any intermediate paths that are necessary, and this is the name of the directory, and then this is if and only if this if and only if this works, then change to this directory. Bash controls the path, so that's an environment key variable that tells where to look for specified commands. That's an important variable and an important source of trouble for people who are new to computing or don't get along with their computers well. And Bash controls all the colors in the terminal display and more. Blesh is a line editor for Bash that implements command completion and syntax highlighting for Bash. So when I want to type in a command, it types in it'll complete any command that you start to type in with whatever you entered last time, and it's very configurable, and it has this syntax highlighting thing, which means that it colors the commands and parameters differently. So if you type in a command that's not recognized by bash, in other words, if you make a typo, bash immediately colors it red until you expand it into a command that is recognized. So that helps me avoid typos. Then my text editor is NeoVim, so it's a descendant of VI, so I've been using VI or Vim or NeoVim since 1987, so what's that, 39 years. And this version, NeoVim, breaks each version of it has broken some compatibility with earlier versions. And it is comparatively difficult to learn in contrast to most text editors. But once you master it, it's the most efficient text editor probably of all of them. And I configure it with a tree that branches off of config nvim in a programming language called Lua, and I can also share that with you if you're interested. And there are plenty of tutorials for it, and I'm a good source of help on it, but I won't say more about it unless somebody asks. Usually students use VS Code, which I don't like because it sends telemetry back to Microsoft. So you could instead, for example, use VS Codium, which is a version of VS Code that doesn't send telemetry to Microsoft. Powerline Go is a package written in the programming language Go that controls the string of characters called the prompt, and it also controls the status lines, which are informative lines of text and symbols at the top and bottom of Windows. Brew is a package manager, and it's similar to one on Windows called Chocolatey, and all the tools I mentioned above can be installed, except Blesh, by using this package manager. And the advantage of this package manager is I can update all the tools that I have once a week, usually on the weekend, using Brew, instead of having to check whether there are updates available for all my packages. I have literally a little over 300 packages loaded. I don't use all of them directly. I use a small fraction of them directly. Many of them have dependencies on other packages. That's how it mushrooms to being over 300 packages. And so it would be tedious to check for updates. So I just say brew update and brew upgrade once a week, and that does it for me. And you can visit its URL to get the installation instructions, which are very easy. And then after installing it, you say brew install and the name of the package to install the package. And if it doesn't find the package, you can say brew search package name to see if brew spells it differently. For example, Claude Code is called Claude-Code. If you say brew search Claude, you'll get a list of Claude-related tools. If you say Claude space code, I think you get nothing. So you want to use, if you use brew, you want to use the search function. Okay, so that's it for this. I can put all my configuration files on Canvas if you want them. I'm very happy to help, but it's not anything that's related to your grade in this class. So that's that. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to our next meeting.